Welcome back to Dreamscape Archives. Tonight, we journey into the shadows of Iwatodai City to explore one of the most philosophically rich and emotionally devastating tales ever told in video games. Over the next hour, we'll unravel the complete lore of Persona 3, a story about death, friendship, sacrifice, and the inescapable truth that connects us all. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin this journey into the dark hour, where the boundary between life and death becomes terrifyingly thin. The dark hour and ancient origins. In the city of Iwatodai on Port Island, there exists a phenomenon that most people will never experience, never perceive, and certainly never understand. When the clock strikes midnight, as the final second of one day gives way to the first moment of the next, something impossible happens. Time stops, yet continues. The world transforms into something alien and hostile, bathed in an eerie green light beneath a massive yellow moon. This is the dark hour, a hidden 25th hour that exists between one day and the next, invisible to most of humanity. During this supernatural hour, ordinary people are encased in coffins, their consciousness suspended in a protective sleep that shields them from the horrors that emerge. These coffins stand upright on street corners, in buildings, on trains frozen mid-journey, silent monuments to humanity's vulnerability during this hidden hour. The transformation is absolute and terrifying. Electronics cease functioning, cars stand empty and inert, and the very air seems to carry a weight of dread and anticipation. But those unlucky few who remain conscious during the dark hour find themselves in a nightmare realm where monstrous entities called shadows roam freely, hunting for human prey. These shadows take countless forms, from small scuttling creatures that move like insects to massive towering monstrosities that dwarf buildings. Some appear almost elegant in their horror, floating wraith-like through the streets, while others are grotesque amalgamations of shapes and textures that seem to defy the laws of physics and biology. What they all share is a fundamental hostility toward human consciousness, an instinctive drive to attack and consume the minds of those unfortunate enough to encounter them. These shadows don't just kill their victims in the conventional sense. They target something far more fundamental, something that exists at the very core of human consciousness itself. When a shadow attacks a person, it seeks to devour their psyche, leaving behind an empty shell that medical science can barely explain. The victims fall into what becomes known as apathy syndrome, a condition where they lose all motivation, all emotion, all will to live or engage with the world around them. They become living corpses, breathing and technically alive, but fundamentally dead in every way that matters, having lost the spark of consciousness that makes us human. To understand the dark hour, we must travel back billions of years to an event so catastrophic that it fundamentally shaped the development of life on Earth. In the primordial past, when our planet was still young and life had yet to take hold, something fell from the cosmos. This wasn't a simple meteorite or asteroid. It was a living entity, a consciousness of unimaginable scope and power that existed on a scale we can barely comprehend. This being was Nyx, named after the Greek primordial goddess of night, and she was what supplementary materials describe as a planet-sized creature that traveled through space itself. The collision between Nyx and prehistoric Earth was beyond devastating. The impact was so severe that it literally tore Nyx's existence into two separate pieces, sundering her being in a way that violated the fundamental nature of what she was. Imagine a consciousness so vast that it encompasses the entirety of a planet, experiencing existence across scales of space and time that human minds cannot possibly comprehend, suddenly and violently split in half. Her physical form, her body, was cast off into space, where it drifted into Earth's orbit and became what we now see every night when we look up at the sky. Nyx's body became the moon itself, a constant presence hanging in the heavens, forever watching the world she accidentally helped create. The moon in Persona 3's world is not just a celestial body, it's the physical shell of an alien goddess, a cosmic entity frozen in orbit, its soulless form casting light down upon the planet that holds its consciousness captive. This explains why the moon appears so prominently throughout the game, why its phases matter so much, and why it takes on that distinctive, sickly yellow color during the dark hour. We're not just looking at a satellite, we're looking at Nyx's body, patiently waiting in the void for the signal that will call its mind home and allow it to reclaim what was taken from it billions of years ago. But while her body drifted into the void, her psyche, her consciousness and mind remained behind on Earth's surface, trapped within the planet that had torn her apart. This cosmic consciousness was too alien, too powerful, too fundamentally other for the young Earth to contain. It represented a form of existence that operated on principles completely incompatible with the life that was beginning to emerge. Where life requires distinction, separation, the ability to differentiate self from environment, Nyx's consciousness represented a kind of ultimate unity, an ending of all distinctions, a return to the primordial state before existence separated into individual beings. As life began to emerge and evolve, as the first stirrings of human consciousness developed, something incredible happened. The collective unconscious of humanity, what would later be called the Sea of Souls, instinctively recognized Nyx's psyche as an existential threat. In what we might interpret as an act of collective self-preservation, occurring on a level beyond conscious thought, humanity appears to have sealed away Nyx's consciousness in the deepest depths of the Sea of Souls. Whether this was a deliberate action by some ancient force, or simply an automatic response of the developing collective unconscious, remains unclear, but the result was the same. But you cannot simply lock away something so vast and powerful without consequences. Nyx's imprisoned psyche fragmented and splintered, giving birth to countless entities that would come to be known as shadows. These shadows are fragments of Nyx's consciousness, pieces of her alien mind that exist in opposition to human consciousness itself. Where humans possess something called a persona, a mask we wear to face the world and interact with others, shadows represent the opposite, the hidden parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the darkness we keep locked away in the depths of our psyche. For millions of years, this arrangement held. Humanity lived and died, civilizations rose and fell, and Nyx's consciousness remained safely sealed away in the collective unconscious, unable to reunite with her body or threaten the existence of human life. But human ambition and curiosity would eventually disturb this ancient equilibrium in the most catastrophic way possible. In the late 20th century, a powerful corporation called the Kirijo Group became obsessed with understanding the nature of shadows and the hidden hour. Led by members of the wealthy Kirijo family, researchers established a secret laboratory on Port Island, determined to unlock the mysteries of the supernatural world that existed just beyond normal human perception. They discovered substances called plumes of dusk, mysterious artifacts that could bridge the gap between the physical world and the Sea of Souls. The Kirijo researchers used these plumes of dusk to conduct experiments that would prove to be humanity's greatest mistake. They learned how to extract shadows from the Sea of Souls and manifest them in the physical world, studying them and attempting to harness their power. The ultimate goal of their research was audacious beyond measure. They sought to gather together enough shadows to form a massive entity, a singular consciousness so powerful that it could serve as a beacon, a signal strong enough to reach across the void and touch Nyx's consciousness in the depths of the Sea of Souls. This massive shadow construct became known simply as death. The researchers believed they could control it, could use it for their own purposes. They were wrong. One of the scientists, a man named Eiichiro Takeba, realized the horrible truth of what they were creating. Death wasn't just another shadow to be studied and controlled. It was a key, a signal that would call out to Nyx's consciousness and compel it to reunite with her body in the moon. And if that happened, if Nyx's psyche and body were to reunite, the result would be the complete and total extinction of humanity. Takeba understood that he had to stop the experiment at any cost. In the final stages of Death's creation, he sabotaged the machinery, hoping to prevent the ultimate catastrophe. His actions triggered a massive explosion that killed him and all the other researchers in the facility. But while Takeba died a hero, his sacrifice was only partially successful. The explosion didn't destroy Death, it fractured it. The massive shadow split apart, with 12 fragments scattering as individual arcana shadows, while the core of Death itself, the 13th piece, would need to be contained separately. These fragmented arcana shadows went into a berserk rage, and the explosion did something even more terrible. It didn't just destroy the laboratory, it warped the very fabric of space and time around the facility. The site of the disaster became Tartarus, a massive tower that exists in the same physical space as Gekukan High School, but can only be perceived during the dark hour. Tartarus is more than just a building or a dungeon. It's a wound in reality itself, a place where the barriers between the physical world and the Sea of Souls have grown dangerously thin. The explosion that created Tartarus also created the dark hour itself. Before that fateful night in 1999, the hidden hour didn't exist. The disaster literally tore a hole in time, creating a pocket dimension that exists outside the normal flow of temporal reality. And while the 12 arcana shadows scattered and hid themselves throughout the city, they possessed an instinctive drive, a fundamental purpose coded into their very being. Should all 12 pieces be destroyed, they would automatically begin reassembling, and combined with the Death Shadow, sealed away separately, would reform into the complete entity that could call to Nyx and bring about what came to be known as the Fall. The Kirijo Group, horrified by what their research had unleashed, attempted to cover up the disaster and contain the damage. They established the Special Extracurricular Execution Squad, or SEs, a group dedicated to hunting down and destroying shadows during the dark hour. But the shadow of their mistake would hang over them for years to come, and the catastrophe they created set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately require the ultimate sacrifice from an unlikely hero who wouldn't arrive in Iwatodai for another 10 years. The journey begins. Seas and the protagonist. On a spring evening in April 2009, a young man steps off a train at Iwatodai Station carrying a single suitcase and a burden he doesn't yet understand. He's a transfer student, an orphan being sent to attend Gekukan High School and live in a dormitory run by the school. His parents died 10 years ago in what was officially reported as a car accident, but the truth involves the Kirijo laboratory explosion, though he doesn't remember the details of that traumatic night. As he makes his way through the quiet streets toward the dormitory, he notices something strange. The world seems different somehow, though he can't quite articulate why. Then midnight strikes, and everything changes. The streetlights flicker and die, replaced by a sickly green glow that seems to emanate from the massive yellow moon hanging bloated in the sky. Every person he sees on the street suddenly vanishes, replaced by standing coffins that line the sidewalks like macabre monuments. Blood pools on the pavement, though no bodies are visible. The young man should be terrified. Most people who experience the dark hour for the first time descend into panic and madness. But he simply continues walking, taking in his transformed surroundings with an almost eerie calm, as if some part of him had always known this hidden world existed. When he arrives at the Iwatodai dormitory, he's greeted not by a welcoming house parent, but by a group of students holding weapons and looking at him with suspicion and shock. They can't understand why this newcomer is conscious during the dark hour, why he hasn't been sealed away in a coffin like everyone else. Before they can properly question him, the dormitory comes under attack. A massive shadow manifests on the roof, its presence warping reality around it. One of the students, a girl named Yukari Takeba, rushes to confront the creature. She summons her persona by pressing a strange device called an evoker to her temple and pulling the trigger. The evoker looks exactly like a handgun, and the act of using it is designed to simulate the psychological stress of facing death, the moment of existential terror that allows persona users to call forth the power sleeping in their souls. Yukari's persona, Ayo, manifests in a burst of energy, but she's clearly outmatched by the powerful shadow. The protagonist rushes to help her, and in that moment of crisis, something awakens within him. A strange child appears to him, a boy named Pharos, who presents him with a contract, a simple document that states he must accept responsibility for his own actions. Without fully understanding what he's agreeing to, the young man signs, and in that instant, he awakens to his power. But what emerges is something nobody expected. The protagonist summons not one, but two personas simultaneously. First comes Orpheus, a figure from Greek mythology, the legendary musician whose songs could charm even the stones and trees. Orpheus represents the protagonist's surface personality, the face he shows to the world. But there's something else lurking beneath that calm exterior, something dark and primal. As Orpheus attacks the shadow, the protagonist momentarily loses control, and his first persona transforms into something monstrous and terrifying. This second persona is Thanatos, the Greek personification of death itself. Thanatos tears through the shadow with savage brutality, shredding it apart before the protagonist can regain control and return to Orpheus, using his first persona to finish off the remaining enemies before collapsing from exhaustion. What nobody realizes in that moment is that Thanatos isn't simply another aspect of the protagonist's psyche. It's something far more significant, a manifestation of the death entity that has been sealed within him, a truth that won't be revealed until much later in the story. The protagonist awakens a week later in the hospital, where he meets with the enigmatic Igor, master of the Velvet Room. This mysterious space exists between dream and reality, between consciousness and unconsciousness, and it takes the form of an endlessly ascending elevator. Igor, a bizarre figure with a long nose and bulging eyes, explains to the protagonist that he possesses an extremely rare gift called the wild card. While most persona users are limited to a single persona that represents their true self, wild card users can wield multiple personas, switching between them at will and using the power of their bonds with others to create even stronger manifestations. Igor explains that the protagonist's power is like the number 0, empty of inherent value, but possessing limitless potential. He advises the young man to forge connections with the people in his life, to build social links that will strengthen his power and allow him to reach heights that would be impossible alone. This guidance sets the stage for one of Persona 3's most important themes, that true strength comes not from isolation and self-sufficiency, but from the bonds we form with others and the willingness to open our hearts despite the risk of pain and loss. The protagonist is recruited into SEEs and quickly becomes the team's field leader due to his unique abilities. The group is composed of students from Gekukan High, each with their own reasons for fighting and their own struggles to overcome. These aren't just generic warriors or archetypal heroes. They're deeply damaged people who have been marked by trauma and loss. Individuals who can summon personas precisely because they've confronted the reality of death in ways that changed them forever. Yukari Takeba, the first party member he fights alongside, carries a burden of anger and abandonment that colors everything she does. She's searching for the truth about her father's death in the laboratory disaster 10 years ago, needing to understand why he was there, what he was working on, and whether he chose his work over his family. Her father, Eiichiro Takeba, was the scientist who sabotaged the experiment and died trying to stop death's creation. For years, Yukari believed he had simply abandoned her and her mother, choosing his research over his family, and she's carried that resentment like a weight around her neck. Learning that he died as a hero, that his last act was trying to save humanity from the catastrophe his research had created, forces her to confront her anger and ultimately find forgiveness, not just for her father, but for herself and the resentment she's harbored for so long. Junpei Iori is an energetic classmate who struggles with feelings of inadequacy and jealousy toward the protagonist's natural talents and leadership role. He wants desperately to be special, to matter, to be the hero of his own story rather than a supporting character in someone else's. This insecurity makes him act out, makes him boastful and sometimes difficult. But underneath the bravado is a young man terrified that he's ordinary, that his life won't amount to anything meaningful. His relationship with Chidori Yoshino, a member of the rogue persona user group Strega, becomes the catalyst for his growth. Through loving someone and being willing to sacrifice for them, through experiencing genuine loss when Chidori seemingly dies protecting him, Junpei learns that being a hero isn't about being the strongest or the most talented. It's about being willing to put others before yourself and cherish the connections you form, even knowing they might be taken away. Mitsuru Kirijo, the elegant and reserved student council president, carries the burden of her family's sins and their role in creating the Dark Hour. As the heiress to the Kirijo group, she feels personally responsible for the experiments that unleashed shadows upon the world, for the people who have died or fallen into apathy syndrome, for the hidden hour that forces children to fight monsters in the darkness. Her sense of duty and honor is both her greatest strength and a form of self-imposed punishment, a way of atoning for crimes she didn't commit but feels obligated to make right. Throughout the story, she must learn to balance her responsibility to fix her family's mistakes with the recognition that she cannot let guilt consume her, that she deserves to live her own life rather than existing solely to repair the past. Akihiko Sanada is a champion boxer driven by survivor's guilt and the memory of his sister who died in a fire years ago. He wasn't strong enough to save her then, couldn't protect the person who mattered most, and he's spent every day since training obsessively, pushing himself to become stronger, believing that if he's just powerful enough, he can prevent anyone else he cares about from dying. But strength alone cannot protect people from death, and Akihiko must ultimately confront the fact that his sister wouldn't want him to spend his life punishing himself for failing to achieve the impossible. He needs to learn that honoring the dead doesn't mean torturing yourself with what-ifs. It means living the kind of life they would have wanted for you, cherishing the people still here rather than being consumed by those you've lost. Fuka Yamagishi serves as the team's support specialist, using her persona's unique abilities to scan and analyze enemies and environments. She's quiet and unassuming, someone who has been bullied and isolated, who doesn't believe she has much to offer. Her awakening to her persona comes after she's nearly killed by being trapped in the dark hour, locked inside the school gymnasium where shadows could easily find her, left there by girls who were supposed to be her friends. Through CEs, she finds genuine acceptance for the first time, people who value her for her abilities and her kindness rather than dismissing her as weak or worthless. Her journey is about recognizing her own value and finding the courage to stand alongside her friends even when she's not on the front lines of battle. As the year progresses, they're joined by others, each bringing their own strength to the team and their own emotional baggage that must be unpacked and confronted. Ken Amada is an elementary school student whose young age belies a deep well of pain and a desire for revenge against the person he believes killed his mother. Koromaru is a loyal dog who gained the power to summon a persona, the first animal companion in the Persona series. Though unlike later entries, he's simply a regular dog with supernatural abilities rather than a talking mascot. Shinjiro Aragaki is a former SES member who left the team after a tragic accident, returning reluctantly to protect those he cares about, even as he struggles with his own self-loathing and guilt. And then there's Aegis, who represents something entirely unique in the group. She's not human at all, but an android specifically designed to fight shadows during the dark hour. Created by the Kirijo group as an anti-shadow weapon, Aegis possesses tremendous combat abilities and can operate during the dark hour without needing to awaken a persona through the usual methods. But despite her mechanical nature, Aegis develops very human emotions and attachments, particularly toward the protagonist, whom she feels an inexplicable need to protect. The structure of life for SES members becomes a carefully balanced routine. During the day, they attend classes at Gekukan High, living the life of ordinary students and working to maintain their grades and social connections. In the evenings, they have free time to build social links with various people around Iwatodai, forming connections that range from close friendships to romantic relationships, from mentorships with older adults to bonds with younger children who need guidance. Each social link is associated with one of the major arcana, and strengthening these bonds directly enhances the protagonist's ability to create powerful personas of corresponding arcanas through fusion in the Velvet Room. When the dark hour arrives each night, SES ventures into Tartarus, the massive tower that serves as the primary dungeon throughout the game. Tartarus is a procedurally generated labyrinth that constantly shifts and changes, its floors randomized to create a sense of endless exploration and discovery. The tower is divided into multiple blocks, each one sealed off until CES defeats the corresponding arcana shadow that has hidden itself somewhere in Iwatodai City. These 12 arcana shadows appear during the full moon each month, creating a regular pattern of major boss battles that drive the plot forward. Each full moon operation reveals more about the nature of the dark hour and the shadows that threaten humanity. The team fights their way through increasingly dangerous encounters, watching as their enemies grow stronger and more organized. They rescue civilians who have become trapped in the dark hour, people who weren't sealed in coffins and now wander confused and terrified through the nightmare reality. Some of these people fall victim to a condition known as apathy syndrome, losing their will to live after prolonged exposure to shadows, becoming empty shells that simply exist without any drive or motivation. Igor watches over the protagonist throughout this journey, offering cryptic guidance and facilitating the fusion of personas in the Velvet Room. His attendant, Elizabeth, becomes a social link herself, though their relationship is unusual compared to the others. Elizabeth is deeply curious about the world outside the Velvet Room, having existed in that liminal space for so long that ordinary human experiences fascinate her. She gives the protagonist various requests, asking him to show her different foods, to fuse specific personas, to take her to various locations around the city so she can observe and learn about human life. These interactions, while often played for comedy, hint at deeper questions about the nature of existence and consciousness that will become central to the story's resolution. As the months pass and SEES defeats one arcana shadow after another, the protagonist grows stronger, not just in terms of raw power, but in terms of his connections to the people around him. He helps Yukari come to terms with her father's legacy and forgive him for his perceived abandonment. He supports Junpei through a tragic romance with a girl named Chidori, who is part of a group called Strega, rogue persona users who actively oppose SEs and seek to preserve the Dark Hour. He stands beside Mitsuru as she confronts the sins of her family and chooses to move forward rather than be paralyzed by guilt. He gives Akihiko permission to move beyond his survivor's guilt and live for himself, rather than just for the memory of his sister. Through all of these social links, through every bond forged and every heart touched, the protagonist demonstrates the power of human connection. He shows that opening yourself to others, allowing yourself to be vulnerable and form attachments despite the inevitable pain that comes with caring about people, is not a weakness, but the greatest strength humans possess. This theme of bonds and connection, of choosing to live fully, even knowing that loss is inevitable, becomes the philosophical heart of Persona 3's narrative. But as December approaches and the final arcana shadow falls, SEES believes they're nearing the end of their mission. They think that by defeating all 12 shadows, they'll prevent the emergence of death and save humanity from whatever threat the Kirijo group's experiments unleashed 10 years ago. They have no idea that everything they've been doing, every victory they've achieved, has been leading them not toward salvation, but toward the precipice of an apocalypse that might be impossible to prevent. The truth behind the fall. The betrayal comes from a place none of them expected. Shuji Ikutsuki, the chairman of their school and the adult advisor who has guided CES since its formation, reveals himself to be a true believer in something he calls the fall, an apocalyptic event that will bring about the end of all human life on Earth. Standing atop Tartarus, with the full moon casting its sickly light over them, Ikutsuki explains the horrible truth that SEES has been too naive or too hopeful to see. The 12 arcana shadows they've been hunting and destroying weren't threats to be eliminated. They were pieces, fragments of the greater whole that needed to be defeated, so they would automatically reassemble themselves according to their fundamental programming. By destroying the shadows one by one, SEES hasn't been preventing death's emergence. They've been facilitating it. Each victory brought them one step closer to completing the very thing they sought to prevent. With all 12 fragments destroyed, they would recombine with the death shadow that had been sealed inside the protagonist all along, forming the complete entity that will serve as the herald and harbinger of humanity's extinction. Ikutsuki's ideology is one of nihilistic despair, dressed up as enlightenment. He believes that the fall represents a release from suffering, that the end of all life is not a tragedy to be prevented, but a mercy to be embraced. His willingness to sacrifice all of humanity for this twisted vision of salvation reveals him as a fanatic, someone so consumed by his beliefs that he can justify any atrocity. He attempts to sacrifice SEES to accelerate the process, but his plan is ultimately thwarted, though not before he can set the final stages of the fall into motion. In the aftermath of Ikutsuki's betrayal and death, Seius is left reeling, trying to understand what's actually happening and what they can do to stop it. The answer comes from an unexpected source, a new transfer student who arrived at Gekukan High in the winter. Ryoji Mochizuki is charming, friendly, and popular, quickly becoming well-liked by the other students. But there's something unusual about him, something that Aegis recognizes on an instinctive level. She knows him, or more accurately, she knows what he is. 10 years ago, on the night of the laboratory disaster, Aegis was deployed to stop the newly created Death Shadow, but she couldn't defeat it. The best she could do was seal it away, preventing it from fulfilling its purpose. And the only suitable vessel she could find, the only person whose psyche might be able to contain and suppress something so powerful, was a young boy whose parents had just been killed in the explosion. That boy was the protagonist. For 10 years, he's been carrying death inside him, suppressed and dormant, but always present, a cosmic entity sealed within his soul. When Seius destroyed the final Arcana Shadow, it triggered the reassembly process, and the pieces of death that had been scattered combined with the portion sealed inside the protagonist. The entity was finally complete, but something unexpected happened. Death had spent 10 years living inside a human being, experiencing life through the protagonist's eyes, forming connections and relationships through his experiences. This prolonged contact with humanity caused death to develop its own personality and consciousness, separate from its original purpose as a mindless herald. This new consciousness, this fusion of cosmic entity and human experience, manifested as Ryoji Mochizuki. He is death, but he's also something more, something that has never existed before. He understands his purpose, knows what he was created to do, but he also values the friendships he's formed and genuinely cares about the people of SEES. This inner conflict makes him one of the most tragic figures in the entire story, a being caught between his fundamental nature and the humanity he's accidentally acquired. Ryoji explains the full truth about Nyx and the fall to Seius, and it's far worse than they imagined. Nyx isn't just another shadow or even a particularly powerful entity. She is the primordial goddess herself, the cosmic consciousness that was sealed away billions of years ago. Her body is the moon hanging in the sky above them, and Ryoji's purpose is to serve as the signal that will call to that consciousness, compelling it to descend from the moon and reunite with the psyche that has been trapped in the Sea of Souls. When Nyx descends, when her body and mind reunite, the result will be catastrophic beyond measure. Nyx will forcefully extract all the shadows from the Sea of Souls, tearing them away from the human consciousnesses they're part of. A human without their shadow loses everything that makes them human, falling into permanent apathy syndrome, becoming empty husks without will, emotion, or the spark of life itself. Even if the physical destruction of the moon crashing into Earth didn't kill everyone, the loss of their shadows would cause humanity's consciousness to simply wink out of existence, ending not with a bang, but with a whimper as every person on the planet simultaneously stops caring about their own survival. This is the fall, and according to Ryoji, it's inevitable. Nyx cannot be defeated because she isn't hostile or malevolent, at least not in any way humans would understand. Based on what we learn in the answer, Nyx herself bears no ill will toward humanity. She doesn't hate us or wish us harm. She's simply responding to a call, reclaiming what belongs to her without any awareness of the lives that would be extinguished in the process. Fighting her would be like fighting gravity or the passage of time, raging against a fundamental force that operates beyond concepts of good and evil. But Ryoji, because of the humanity he's gained, offers SEs a choice. If they kill him, if they destroy death, before he can fully manifest and call to Nyx, everyone's memories of the dark hour will be erased. They'll forget everything that happened, forget the year they spent fighting together, forget the bonds they forged, and the trials they overcame. They'll live out the remainder of their lives in blissful ignorance, enjoying the time they have left without the burden of knowing their impending doom. When the fall comes, it will be quick and painless, and they'll die without fear or despair because they won't know it's happening. The game presents this choice to the player on December 31st, New Year's Eve, a moment heavy with symbolism as one year ends and another begins. If you choose to kill Ryoji, the game skips ahead to graduation day, showing CEs living their lives without memory of their time together, happy and content in their ignorance as the fall arrives and quietly ends their story. It's a bad ending, but one that's understandable, even merciful in its way. Sometimes ignorance truly is bliss. But if you spare Ryoji, if Cease chooses to fight, even knowing the battle is hopeless, then the game continues. The calendar advances through January, and Cease prepares for what they know will be their final mission. On the night of January 31st, they climb to the roof of Tartarus, to the very peak of the tower that has been the center of their struggle all year. And there, beneath the massive yellow moon, Ryoji transforms into his true form. The battle against Nyx's avatar is one of the most iconic boss fights in gaming history, not because of its mechanical complexity, but because of the weight behind it. Nyx's avatar cycles through 13 forms, each one representing a different major arcana, forcing seers to face manifestations of the very cards that have defined their journey. The battle is exhausting, pushing them to their absolute limits as they struggle against an enemy they know cannot truly be defeated. But they fight anyway, because that's what it means to be human, to struggle against impossible odds, not because victory is guaranteed, but because the alternative is giving up, and they refuse to surrender. After what feels like an eternity, Cease manages to defeat Nyx's avatar, breaking through the herald to confront the cosmic consciousness itself. They stand at the peak of reality, facing the moon itself as Nyx prepares to initiate the fall. And it's here, at this moment of ultimate despair, that the protagonist discovers the true power of the bonds he's forged throughout the year. Every social link he's maxed, every relationship he's nurtured, every heart he's touched, they all manifest as the ultimate persona, the Fool Arcana's final form. This persona is called Messiah, and it represents the culmination of everything the protagonist has learned and everyone he's connected with. But even with this ultimate power, he cannot defeat Nyx, because Nyx cannot be defeated. Instead, the protagonist does something that nobody, not even Igor, could have predicted. He doesn't try to destroy Nyx or drive her away. Instead, he uses his own soul as a barrier, transforming himself into what becomes known as the Great Seal, a bulwark that stands between humanity and Nyx, preventing her from ever reaching the consciousness locked away in the Sea of Souls. This sacrifice allows SEIs to survive, allows humanity to continue existing, but it comes at an ultimate cost. The protagonist has literally given his soul to protect everyone else, and without that soul, his body cannot sustain life for much longer. The game doesn't reveal this immediately. After the battle, everything seems fine. The dark hour ends, Tartarus vanishes, and the calendar advances to spring as SEIS prepares for graduation. On the day of the ceremony, the protagonist meets with his friends on the roof of the school, the place where their journey together first began. As they talk and laugh, remembering everything they've been through, the protagonist feels a profound sense of peace. He's surrounded by the people he fought for, the bonds he forged, and he knows that because of his sacrifice, they'll be able to live full lives, to pursue their dreams and find happiness. He's tired, so very tired, and as he rests his head in Aegis's lap, he closes his eyes one final time. The game ends with the protagonist's death, a conclusion both tragic and strangely hopeful, a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of heroism is giving everything so that others might live. The ultimate sacrifice and the eternal cycle. The epilogue to Persona 3, released as an edition called The Answer in Persona 3 FS, reveals the full truth behind the protagonist's sacrifice and introduces an entity that makes the story even more heartbreaking. Several weeks after the protagonist's death, the members of SEIS find themselves trapped inside their dormitory, unable to leave as the calendar mysteriously repeats the same day over and over. In their confusion and grief, they discover a massive chasm that has opened in the floor, leading down into something called the Abyss of Time. Aegis, who has been utterly destroyed by the protagonist's death, finds herself at the center of this new crisis. She's attacked by a mysterious figure who appears to be another android like herself, though this one introduces herself as Metis. During the fight, something impossible happens. Aegis awakens to the same wildcard ability that the protagonist possessed, inheriting his power and his connection to the Velvet Room. Her initial persona, Athena, transforms into Orpheus, the very same persona that the protagonist first awakened to on that spring night when everything began. As SEIS descends into the abyss of time, they're forced to revisit key moments from their past, experiencing echoes of the battles they fought and the decisions they made. These memory fragments reveal details about the protagonist's sacrifice that none of them fully understood at the time. Eventually, they reach the deepest point, the place where the protagonist's soul now resides, and they witness the truth of the Great Seal firsthand. What they discover is that Métis was correct in questioning the nature of Nyx's threat. As revealed through their journey into the past, Nyx herself is neither hostile nor malevolent toward humanity. She's simply a cosmic force, an entity so vast and incomprehensible that human suffering barely registers to her consciousness. The real threat, the actual reason the protagonist had to sacrifice himself, turns out to be something else entirely. This entity is called Erebus, and it represents the single most heartbreaking aspect of Persona 3's entire narrative. Erebus is the physical manifestation of humanity's collective desire for death. It's formed from the despair, grief, suffering, and hopelessness that exists within human hearts. Every person who loses meaning in their life, everyone who finds themselves wishing for an end to their pain, everyone who looks at the suffering of the world and thinks that maybe non-existence would be preferable to continued struggle. All of that negative emotion and death wish energy coalesces in the depths of the Sea of Souls into this monstrous entity. Erebus calls out to Nyx, reaching toward her with humanity's longing for the ultimate end. And Nyx, neither good nor evil, but simply responding to the call she receives, begins to descend. The game suggests she's not actively choosing to destroy humanity, but rather responding automatically to Erebus's summons, much like a natural force responding to the conditions that trigger it. The Great Seal that the protagonist created doesn't hold back Nyx herself. It stands between Erebus and Nyx, preventing humanity's death wish from reaching the cosmic goddess and triggering the fall. This revelation is devastating on multiple levels. It means that the protagonist's sacrifice wasn't a one-time act that solved the problem forever. Every day, Erebus reforms and attacks the Great Seal, trying to break through and reach Nyx. Every day, the protagonist's soul must hold back the weight of humanity's collective despair. And as long as even a single human harbors a wish for death, as long as suffering and hopelessness exist in the world, Erebus will continue to form, and the protagonist will never be free. Seas confronts Erebus at the base of the Great Seal, engaging in a battle that feels almost futile. They know that even if they destroy it here and now, it will simply reform as long as humanity's death wish persists. But they fight anyway, because they refuse to let the protagonist bear this burden alone without at least trying to help. They defeat Erebus, pushing it back temporarily, but as Mitsuru grimly notes, it will return. It always returns. As long as humans exist, some portion of humanity will always wish for death, will always call out to Nyx in their darkest moments. The epilogue ends with SEEs making a promise, a vow to live their lives as fully as possible, to find happiness and meaning, and help others do the same, in the hope that maybe, if enough people find reasons to keep living, if enough of humanity can overcome their despair, Erebus might finally weaken enough that the protagonist could be freed from his eternal vigil. It's a bittersweet conclusion, one that acknowledges that some burdens cannot be fully lifted, some sacrifices cannot be undone, but that we can still choose to honor those sacrifices by living well. The epilogue also reveals the truth about Métis. She isn't actually a separate android at all, but a physical manifestation of Aegis's suppressed emotions, a part of her psyche that she had locked away in her grief over the protagonist's death. When Aegis awakened to the wild card and gained access to the Sea of Souls, her rejected emotions took physical form, creating Metis as a kind of shadow self. This revelation helps Aegis accept all aspects of herself, both the rational android and the grieving girl who lost someone precious, allowing her to finally process her loss and move forward. Throughout the answer, we also learn more about Elizabeth, Igor's assistant, in the Velvet Room. It's revealed that she had developed genuine feelings for the protagonist during their time together, and learning of his fate as the Great Seal drives her to make an unprecedented decision. Elizabeth chooses to leave the Velvet Room, abandoning her position and purpose to search for a way to free the protagonist from his eternal burden. This quest becomes central to her character in subsequent games, particularly in Persona 4 Arena, where she appears as a special boss fight. In that game, it's revealed that Elizabeth has been hunting down and destroying Erebus every time it reforms, buying the protagonist moments of respite from his endless vigil. But she recognizes this as only a temporary solution. Each time Erebus returns, it grows larger and more powerful, reflecting humanity's ever-increasing despair. The only permanent solution would be to fundamentally change human nature itself, to eliminate the death wish that exists in the collective unconscious, a task that seems impossible, but one that Elizabeth refuses to give up on. The mythology behind these entities adds another layer of meaning to the story. In Greek mythology, Nyx was one of the primordial deities, born from chaos itself, representing the darkness and night that existed before the gods shaped the world. She was so powerful that even Zeus, king of the gods, feared her wrath. Erebus, her brother and consort, represented the deepest darkness between earth and the underworld, the shadows where light cannot reach. Together, they gave birth to many other primordial forces, including Thanatos, the personification of death. Persona 3 uses this mythology brilliantly, connecting ancient stories to modern themes about the relationship between death and meaning, darkness and consciousness. The fact that Thanatos emerges from within the protagonist, that a manifestation of death itself has been part of his soul for 10 years, recontextualizes his entire journey. Every time he used the power of the wild card, every time he summoned a persona and fought to protect others, he was unknowingly wielding power connected to the very force that would ultimately try to end the world, transforming it into a tool for preservation rather than destruction. The protagonist's unique ability to use multiple personas, his status as the wild card, was granted when he signed the contract with Pharos on that first night. Igor describes this power as being like the number 0, empty but possessing limitless potential. Yet, one could argue that having death sealed within him from childhood created a kind of emptiness in his soul, a void that made him particularly suited to wield the wild card's power. This foreign presence may have fundamentally altered his psyche in ways that allowed him to become a vessel for countless personas. What seemed like a special gift was perhaps shaped by a wound, a fundamental incompleteness in his being that he learned to fill through the bonds he formed with others. This connects to one of Persona 3's deepest themes about the relationship between loss and identity, between the holes in our hearts and the ways we fill them with connections to others. The game suggests that the protagonist is, in a sense, incomplete without the bonds he forms, that the social links he builds fill the emptiness inside him and give him the strength to manifest multiple personas. His power appears to come not from being whole and self-sufficient, but from being open to others and choosing to let them help complete him through genuine connection. The sacrifice he makes in the end is thus the natural conclusion of everything his journey represented. He gives everything, empties himself completely, transforms his entire being into a barrier that protects humanity, not because he's a selfless saint or a chosen one destined for greatness, but because throughout the year he spent with SEs, he learned that other people are worth protecting even at the ultimate cost to himself. His sacrifice is meaningful not because he was special from birth, but because he chose to become the kind of person who would make that sacrifice through the relationships he built and the connections he forged. Themes, legacy, and the power of accepting death. At its core, Persona 3 is a meditation on mortality and meaning, a story that asks profound questions about how we should live when we know that death is inevitable. The game's central philosophy draws heavily from the concept of memento mori, a Latin phrase meaning remember that you must die. This isn't meant to be depressing or nihilistic, but rather liberating. By accepting death as an inevitable part of existence, we're freed to focus on making our lives meaningful in the time we have. The dark hour serves as a constant reminder of death's presence, a literal manifestation of the boundary between existence and non-existence that most people never consciously perceive. Those who can experience the dark hour, who can summon personas and fight shadows, are people who have confronted their own mortality in some way, who have stared into the abyss and found the strength to continue living despite knowing that the abyss stares back. Each member of CEs has their own relationship with death that shapes their character arc throughout the game. Yukari struggles with anger toward her deceased father, feeling abandoned and betrayed by his choices, needing to learn forgiveness and acceptance. Junpei faces the death of his first genuine love and must find the courage to continue living and caring about others despite the pain that caring inevitably brings. Akihiko carries survivor's guilt from his sister's death, punishing himself for being alive when she isn't, until he learns that the best way to honor the dead is to live fully. Mitsuru bears the weight of the deaths her family's experiments caused, feeling responsible for tragedies that occurred before she was even born, learning that she can acknowledge past mistakes without letting them define her future. Ken seeks revenge for his mother's death, discovering that hatred and vengeance only breed more suffering, that the path forward requires choosing forgiveness and hope. Shinjiro knows he's dying, his body deteriorating from the side effects of the drugs he's used to stabilize his persona, and he must decide whether to hide away and wait for death or spend his remaining time protecting those he cares about. And Aegis, despite being a machine, grapples with mortality more profoundly than anyone. She watches the protagonist die experiences the devastating grief of losing someone irreplaceable and must learn to continue existing even when the person who gave her existence meaning is gone. Her journey in The Answer is about accepting that loss is part of life, that grief is the price we pay for love, and that honoring those we've lost means living the kind of life they would have wanted for us. The social link system reinforces these themes by showing how connections with others give life meaning even in the face of mortality. Every person the protagonist forms a bond with is facing their own struggles, their own confrontations with loss and meaning. Through helping them work through these issues, through simply being present and showing that he cares, the protagonist demonstrates that the antidote to despair isn't denying death or pretending suffering doesn't exist, but rather choosing to live authentically and form genuine connections with others, despite knowing that all things must eventually end. This philosophy directly opposes the nihilism represented by characters like Ikutsuki and entities like Erebus. The death wish that forms Erebus comes from people who look at the inevitability of death and conclude that nothing matters, that all effort is futile because we'll all eventually die anyway. But Persona 3 argues that this is exactly backwards. It's precisely because our time is limited that our choices matter, that the relationships we build and the moments we share have value. Meaning isn't found in spite of mortality, but because of it. The game also explores the concept of the collective unconscious, drawing on Jungian psychology to examine how individual consciousnesses are connected to something larger than themselves. The Sea of Souls represents this shared unconscious realm where all human psyches ultimately connect, where archetypes and personas exist as manifestations of universal human experiences and emotions. This interconnectedness means that actions taken by individuals can have far-reaching effects on the collective psyche of humanity. This is why the protagonist's sacrifice works on a metaphysical level. By using his own soul as the Great Seal, he's not just physically blocking Erebus. He's making a statement about human nature itself. His willingness to give everything to protect others, his transformation of bonds and connections into ultimate power, serves as a counterpoint to the despair that forms Erebus. He proves that humans are capable of genuine selflessness, that our capacity for love and sacrifice is just as fundamental to our nature as our capacity for suffering and despair. The legacy of Persona 3 extends far beyond its original release in 2006. The game fundamentally changed the direction of the Persona series and influenced countless other JRPGs with its innovative social simulation elements, its sophisticated character writing, and its willingness to tackle dark philosophical themes without flinching. The calendar system, the social links, the balance between dungeon crawling and daily life simulation, all of these became hallmarks of the series going forward, refined and expanded in Persona 4 and Persona 5, but originating here in Persona 3. The game has been re-released multiple times, each version adding new content while preserving the core narrative. Persona 3 FES added the Answer epilogue and numerous quality-of-life improvements. Persona 3 Portable added the option to play as a female protagonist with altered social links and a slightly different perspective on events, though this version is considered to take place in an alternate timeline rather than being part of the main continuity. Most recently, Persona 3 Reload, released in early 2024, provided a comprehensive remake with modernized gameplay and graphics, while staying faithful to the story that made the original so impactful. The soundtrack, composed primarily by Shoji Meguro, has become iconic in its own right, with songs like Burn My Dread and Memories of You, capturing the game's themes of confronting mortality and cherishing fleeting moments. The music uses a mix of hip-hop, rock, and haunting melodies to create an atmosphere that's simultaneously melancholic and hopeful, reflecting the game's message about finding light even in the darkest circumstances. Perhaps the most enduring aspect of Persona 3's legacy is how it handles its ending. In an era where happy endings were the standard for JRPGs, where players expected to save the world and have everyone survive, Persona 3 had the courage to show that sometimes victory requires sacrifice, that the best outcome might still involve profound loss. The protagonist's death isn't a failure or a tragedy to be fixed. It's the natural and necessary conclusion to his journey, the culmination of everything he learned about what it means to live meaningfully. This refusal to compromise on its central themes, to provide an easy answer or a magical solution that undoes the sacrifice, gives the ending a power that resonates with players long after they've finished the game. We mourn for the protagonist, we grieve alongside C's, and we understand on a visceral level what the story has been trying to communicate all along. Life is precious precisely because it doesn't last forever. The bonds we form matter because we won't always have the opportunity to be with the people we care about. And sometimes the most heroic thing we can do is give everything we have so that others might have the chance to live full lives. The protagonist's final moments, resting peacefully surrounded by friends as he closes his eyes for the last time, encapsulate everything Persona 3 wants to say about death and meaning. He isn't afraid. He isn't bitter or regretful. He's simply tired, having given everything he had to give, finding peace in the knowledge that his sacrifice protected the people he cared about and allowed them to continue their journey, even though he couldn't continue his own. It's a scene of profound sadness, but also profound beauty, a reminder that there are things worth dying for, and that a life lived in service of protecting others is a life that has meaning. So if you've been with us this whole journey, if you've followed the protagonist from his arrival at Iwatodai Station, through the year of battles and bonds, through the revelation of terrible truths and the ultimate sacrifice, then you understand why Persona 3 remains one of the most philosophically rich and emotionally impactful stories in gaming. It's a meditation on mortality that doesn't look away from the darkness, but finds light within it. A story about accepting death that's ultimately about choosing to live fully. A tragedy that somehow manages to be profoundly hopeful. Before we close, I want to thank you for spending this time with me exploring the complete lore of Persona 3. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of gaming's most profound narratives, please consider liking this video, and subscribing to Dreamscape Archives for more comprehensive explorations of the stories that define our favorite games. Leave a comment letting me know what other game lore you'd like me to explore. And remember, as Persona 3 teaches us, memento mori, remember that you must die, but more importantly, remember to live. Thanks for listening and sleep well.